For 30 years, one country made everything the world consumed. Your phone, your shoes, your car parts, your medicine. China became the factory of the world and got rich doing it. But something is changing, quietly, behind closed doors. The world's biggest companies are making a decision they should have made years ago. They are leaving, and the country they are moving to might surprise you. The numbers tell the story before the words do. Samsung closed its last Chinese factory. Nike, Adidas, and Under Armour have all shifted manufacturing away from Chinese suppliers. Google's Pixel phones are now made somewhere else entirely. This isn't a slow drip. This is a stampede, and it's happening faster than anyone predicted. China still holds about 29% of global manufacturing output as of 2023. According to Le Monde's reporting from the Canton Fair. That's a staggering number, but the direction is clear. Companies are adopting what the industry calls a China Plus One strategy, keeping some production in China while building backup factories in other countries. Vietnam Briefing tracks this shift closely, and the pattern is unmistakable. The question is not whether China is losing its grip. The question is who is grabbing what China drops. To understand who wins next, you need to understand why China is losing. Three forces are pulling the factory of the world apart at the same time. The first is cost. Chinese wages have climbed sharply over 2 decades. The cheap labour advantage that built the Chinese manufacturing miracle is fading. The second force is geopolitics. After COVID exposed how dangerous it was to depend on one country for everything, from medicines to computer chips, Western governments started paying companies to move production closer to home or to friendly countries. The third force is a shift China itself chose. In May 2015, Beijing launched a plan called Made in China 2025. The goal was to move Chinese manufacturing up the value chain toward robotics, aerospace, and advanced technology. China is deliberately letting go of the low-cost, labour-heavy work it used to dominate. It wants the high-end stuff. That means the factory floors making T-shirts and phone cases are up for grabs. Every major economy on Earth is competing to fill that gap, but most of them will fail. Let's start with the one that moved first and moved fastest. Vietnam. This country's rise has been nothing short of staggering. According to Vietnam's General Statistics Office, the economy grew 8.02% in 2025, making it the fastest growing economy in Asia that year and its second highest growth rate since 2011. Goods exports hit $475 billion, up 17% year over year. Imports rose 19.4% to $455 billion, leaving a trade surplus of roughly $20 billion. Total trade turnover reached $930 billion in a single year. Processed industrial goods made up about 88.7% of all Vietnamese exports. This is not a country selling rice and fish anymore. Vietnam is an industrial machine. And here's a detail that should make every Western CEO pay attention. In late 2025, Vietnam overtook China to become the #1 exporter of clothing to the United States. Jean-François Limontot, a consultant at Evalliance, pointed out that Vietnam exported nearly 40 billion euros worth of clothing that year. Some Vietnamese garment factories that used to rely 90% on Chinese inputs retooled and found alternative supply lines after US tariffs hit Chinese goods. That kind of speed shows real adaptability. Vietnam's industrial sector contributed 31.73% to GDP growth in the first 9 months of 2025, with industrial value rising nearly 10% year over year. But Vietnam has a ceiling. Its population is only about 98 million. China is among Vietnam's top 3 sources of foreign investment, and China exported roughly $84 billion in electrical machinery and components to Vietnam in 2025. That means a lot of what gets made in Vietnam still depends on parts flowing in from Chinese factories. The local value added in many industries remains lower than it looks on paper. Vietnam can take a slice of what China gives up, not the whole pie. Now India. This is the country every Western CEO talks about in public. 1.4 billion people. The world's largest young workforce, a democratic government that speaks English and wants foreign investment badly. And the numbers are real. India's electronics production surged roughly 6 times between fiscal year 2014-15 and fiscal year 2024-25. Going from about $21 billion to roughly $127 billion, according to India's Ministry of Electronics and IT. Electronics exports jumped about 8 times in the same period. India is now the world's 2nd largest mobile phone manufacturer. In 2020, the Indian government rolled out something called Production-Linked Incentive Schemes, or PLI, basically cash rewards for companies that manufacture in India and hit export targets. But here's the uncomfortable truth about India that the business press often glosses over. India has been the obvious answer for 20 years, and it keeps disappointing. Infrastructure still can't match Chinese efficiency. Bureaucracy can slow factory approvals to a crawl. And the domestic market is so enormous that companies often get distracted selling to Indians instead of making things for export. India's electronics exports to China actually grew about 90% in November 2025 compared to the previous year, mostly from printed circuit boards and mobile components. That's promising, but India still imports a huge share of its electronic components from China and Hong Kong. India will grow. India will matter, but India alone cannot replace China. Not yet. Mexico is a different kind of bet. It shares a border with the world's largest consumer market. Between January 2023 and February 2025, Mexico recorded 346 investment announcements totaling $78.25 billion, largely from foreign manufacturers trying to serve North American supply chains. In November 2025, Chinese automotive supplier Tongling broke ground on a $90 million plant in Irapuato, Guanajuato, expected to create over 460 direct jobs. The nearshoring wave is real, but Mexico faces serious problems. Electricity shortages are anchoring its manufacturing capacity. El País reported in October 2025 that Mexico is actively working to fix power reliability issues that are holding back factory expansion. Regulatory delays and infrastructure gaps remain stubborn obstacles. Then there's Bangladesh, a country most people forget when they talk about replacing China. But Bangladesh has been the world's second largest garment exporter after China for years. Ready-made garment exports hit roughly $40 billion in fiscal year 2024-25, up from about $1 billion in 1990, according to the IMF. Exports to the United States alone grew 11.75% year-over-year in 2025, reaching $8.2 billion. But the cracks are showing. 216 garment factories shut down in 2025, wiping out roughly 1 million jobs, according to local reporting. When your entire export economy depends on one industry, a single bad year can be devastating. Now here's where most analysts get this story wrong. The mainstream view says some single country will step up and become the next China. Vietnam is the favorite. India is the dark horse. Mexico is the wild card. But that framing misses what's actually happening. No single country will replace China. What's really taking shape is a fragmentation, a deliberate splitting of the world's supply chains into regional clusters. An America's cluster centered on Mexico, pulling production close to the US border. A South Asian cluster where India and Bangladesh handle different pieces. A Southeast Asian cluster where Vietnam absorbs electronics and apparel. And China itself keeps the most valuable parts, the advanced manufacturing, the domestic market of 1.4 billion consumers, the upstream components that everyone else still buys from Chinese factories. China loses the monopoly, but it does not disappear. It moves up. It keeps the hard stuff, and the countries fighting over what China voluntarily gives up will spend the next 20 years building what China spent 30 years becoming. The factory of the world is not moving to one country. It is spreading across many, and the companies, the investors, and the governments that understand this first will be the ones that come out ahead. The ones still waiting for a single country to raise its hand and say, "Pick me," will be left behind. Because the next China is not a country. It is a system, and that system is being built right now, piece by piece, factory by factory, across 3 continents at the same time.